The door creaked open slowly, the late afternoon sun casting long golden beams across the living room floor. The scent of worn leather and dust hit his nose first, followed by the faintest smell of lavender, his wife's old favorite. "Sergeant." Daniel Brooks stepped inside, his combat boots silent on the wooden floor, each step heavier with the weight of memories he hadn't faced in over a year. His duffel bag, weathered and frayed, slid from his shoulder and landed with a soft thump. He was finally home. The silence in the house was strange. Not peaceful. Too still. Too empty. Daniel had imagined this moment every day while deployed. He had dreamed of his daughter's laughter echoing through the hallways, his wife's voice calling out from the kitchen, the kind of noisy, beautiful chaos that made a house feel like home. But here, it was quiet. Too quiet. He glanced around. The living room. The couch looked untouched, no toys scattered on the carpet, no TV humming in the background. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn halfway. A layer of dust shimmered on the coffee table under the sunlight, like no one had cleaned in weeks. Something was off. "Lily?" he called out, his voice cracking just slightly, more from emotion than disuse. He cleared his throat and stepped, further in. "Sweetheart? Daddy's home." No answer. His heart began to thud louder. It wasn't fear yet, just confusion. A deep, growing unease that settled in his gut. He walked toward the hallway, past the framed photos on the wall. Wedding, day smiles, baby Lily wrapped in pink, birthdays and beach days frozen in time. It felt like a different life. He hesitated outside his daughter's bedroom door, noticing it was open just a crack. Pushing it gently, he peeked inside. And there she was. Lily, his daughter. Just 8 years old, small for her age, curled up on the hardwood floor beside her bed. She wasn't tucked in. No pillow, no blanket, just a tiny frame and a wrinkled t-shirt, arms wrapped around a stuffed bunny, fast asleep on the cold, hard floor. Daniel froze. 1,000 thoughts crashed into his mind at once. Why wasn't she in bed? Where was her mother? Why was she sleeping like this? Like she had no other option. He knelt beside her, careful not to startle her awake. Her cheeks were flushed, and her dark curls were tangled. There was a faint bruise on one arm, small but noticeable. He reached out with a trembling hand, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Lily," he whispered, voice barely holding together. "Baby, it's Daddy. I'm home." Her eyes fluttered open slowly, confusion clouding her gaze for a moment before it turned into recognition. And then suddenly she sat up, throwing her arms around his neck with a desperate force that nearly knocked him backward. "Daddy!" she cried, burying her face in his shoulder. "You came back." Tears spilled from her eyes, and Daniel felt his own rise to the surface. He held her tight, trying to process what he was seeing, what he was feeling. Relief. Joy. And something darker. Concern. Fear. Rage. "Of course I came back," he said softly, rocking her in his arms. "I promised, didn't I?" She nodded, against him, still clinging. "Why were you sleeping on the floor, baby? Where's Mom?" At the mention of her mother, Lily stiffened in his arms. "She's not here," she said slowly. Her voice was quiet. Careful. Daniel pulled back just enough to look her in the eye. "What do you mean she's not here?" Lily bit her lip, hesitating like she wasn't sure what she was allowed to say. "She went out," she said after a pause. "A lot. She doesn't stay home much anymore." Something inside Daniel cracked. He felt it like a splinter in his chest. "How long has this been happening?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Sometimes she leaves at night and doesn't come back until morning. I just stay in my room." "Alone?" She nodded. Daniel clenched his jaw. He had left for duty with the assurance that his daughter would be safe, loved, and protected. He trusted that her mother, his wife, would do right by her. But the scene before him told another story. He stood slowly, lifting Lily in his arms. She weighed nothing. She leaned her head on his shoulder, clearly exhausted beyond her years. He carried her to the bed, pulled back the covers, and gently laid her down. She didn't protest. He tucked her in carefully, brushing her hair back, with the same gentleness he used when she was a toddler. "Rest now," he said. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." But his mind was racing. Where was his wife? And how long had Lily been living like this? He stepped out of the room and into the hallway, walking slowly toward their bedroom. As he opened the door, his eyes scanned the room. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted and bunched, clothes on the floor. On the nightstand was an empty wine bottle and a glass, stained with red. A faint smell of alcohol still lingered in the air. His heart sank. The signs were everywhere now that he was seeing them. Neglect, loneliness, pain. He noticed an envelope on the dresser, partially tucked. Beneath a stack of unopened bills, his name was scrawled on the front in familiar handwriting. He picked it up, hands unsteady, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A letter. "Daniel, I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain everything. I've been struggling, and I didn't want to burden you while you were away. Things got out of control. I never meant to hurt Lily. I needed space. I didn't know how to be okay anymore. I'm not sure if I'm coming back. Please take care of her. She needs you more than ever. M." He read it twice, and then a third time, each word sinking in like a stone in water. She left. She just left. And Lily had been fending for herself. Daniel sat down on the edge of the bed, hands gripping the letter, the weight of everything crashing down on him all at once. He had fought in war zones. He'd seen destruction and pain that most people couldn't imagine. But nothing hurt more than realizing his little girl had been abandoned in his absence. He stared out the window, the late afternoon sun now dipping behind the trees. A storm was rolling in, gray clouds thick on the horizon, the kind of storm that seemed to match the turmoil inside him. He had so many questions. Where had his wife gone? What had driven her to walk away from their family? And what had Lily been through while he was gone, that she hadn't even felt safe sleeping in her own bed? One thing was certain. This was not the home he had left behind, and it was his responsibility now to piece it back together. As the first drops of rain tapped against the window pane, Daniel stood. He folded the letter, placed it back on the dresser, and took one last look around the room. There was so much to fix. But first, he had to make sure Lily never felt alone again. He returned to her room just to check. She was still sleeping, her breathing steady, her little hand resting over her bunny's worn ear. He watched her for a moment, his heart breaking and rebuilding all at once. Then came a noise, soft but sharp. A knock at the door. His body tensed. He wasn't expecting anyone. He hadn't even told anyone he was back yet. He walked slowly to the front door, heart thumping louder with each step, peered through the peephole, and what he saw on the other side changed everything. Standing there, drenched from the rain, eyes red and swollen, was a young woman he didn't recognize. But what she said the moment he opened the door stopped him cold. "You don't know me," she began, her voice shaking. "But I think we need to talk. It's about your wife and your daughter." Daniel stared at her, stunned. 1,000 thoughts flooded his mind again. He didn't even know her name. But deep down, he already knew. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Let me know if you'd like the next part of the story, or help with a voiceover script or video storyboard. Daniel stood frozen, rain mist curling around the doorway as the woman outside met his eyes with a look somewhere between fear and urgency. For a second, all he could do was stare. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, thin, soaked, her jacket clinging to her shoulders, hair plastered to her cheeks. She wasn't familiar. He didn't know her name. But something about the way she said, "your wife," and "your daughter," stirred something deep in his gut. "Who are you?" he asked, voice low but steady. "My name's Rachel," she said, quickly. "I live a few blocks down. Please, I wouldn't come here if it wasn't important." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then opened the door wider, stepping aside to let her in. She slipped past him, dripping rain onto the floor, her eyes scanning the house like she already knew what it looked like. He closed the door behind her. "Talk." Rachel looked nervous. She took a shaky breath and wiped water from her brow with her sleeve. "I met your wife a few months ago," she said. "At first, I didn't even know she was married. She never mentioned a husband, never talked about you. I found out later. Too late." Daniel crossed his arms. His jaw tightened. "Go on." Rachel walked into the living room and sat on the fun edge of the couch, clutching the hem of her wet shirt. She started coming around this bar on Main, the one near the old train station. Some nights she'd show up early, some nights she'd stay till closing. She was always alone. At first, I thought she was just blowing off steam, maybe dealing with some stuff. But then she started bringing Lily with her, sometimes late. At night. She'd sit at the bar, drinking, while Lily waited in the corner with crayons and an old phone. I didn't know what to say. Nobody did. Daniel's chest tightened. "She brought my daughter to a bar?" Rachel nodded, guilt flashing across her face. "More than once. And when she stopped bringing her, that was worse. Because we figured she was probably home alone." He ran a hand over his face. Everything was unraveling faster than he could keep up. The letter, the empty bed, Lily sleeping on the floor. That night, David didn't sleep. He sat in the living room watching over Emily as she finally rested on the couch, tucked into warm blankets. The way she clutched her stuffed animal, even in sleep, told him more than words ever could. She hadn't felt safe. Not really. Not for a long time. And he hadn't seen it coming. The old wooden floor creaked every now and then as the house settled, but David's mind was far from still. His thoughts spiraled. Kyle's words replayed over and over. She knows more than you think. What did that mean? What was Emily holding on to? And why hadn't anyone told him that Clara, the babysitter he'd trusted, had just walked away? First thing in the morning, David made some calls. He reached out to the military family coordinator, demanding an explanation. The voice on the other end fumbled through a list of excuses: missed check-ins, unreturned calls, staff changes. There must have been a mix-up, they said. A system error, a clerical oversight. But to David, it all sounded hollow. His daughter had been left alone. That wasn't a mix-up. That was failure. He dug deeper, contacted the sitter directly. Clara answered after several tries. Her voice was distant, cautious. "I had car trouble," she explained quickly. "Then my sister got sick. Things got complicated. I meant to let someone know." "You meant to?" David asked sharply. "You left a 9-year-old girl alone in a house and you meant to tell someone?" There was a pause on the line, then a soft, "I'm sorry." But it wasn't enough. Not nearly. When he hung up, he felt a familiar kind of rage building in his chest, the same kind he'd learned to control during combat, but now aimed at people who were supposed to protect his family while he was gone. Later that morning, Emily sat at the kitchen table, a bowl of cereal in front of her that she barely touched. David sat across from her, trying to find the right words. "Sweetheart," he said gently, You know you can tell me anything, right? She nodded slowly, but kept her eyes on the table. I need to know what happened while I was away. Not just with Clara, but with Kyle, too. Her lip trembled slightly. He was nice, she whispered. He helped me when I was scared. David's heart clenched. I know. I believe you. But I don't understand how he knew you were here. Did you call him? She hesitated. No. He just showed up. One night when the lights went out, I was crying. He knocked and said he knew Mom. I remembered her talking about him once, a long time ago. So I let him in. David leaned in. You remembered her talking about him? Emily nodded. She had a picture in a drawer. She said he was her old friend, that he helped her a lot before she met you. That shook David. A picture? In a drawer? He'd never seen it, never heard of Kyle. Was it someone she'd kept in the past on purpose, or someone she didn't want to talk about? He went quiet for a moment, unsure how to ask what came next. But he had to. Did he ever scare you? Emily shook her head quickly. No. He made dinner sometimes. He stayed until I fell asleep. That's it. David nodded. Slowly, still trying to wrap his head around the fact that this stranger had spent days, maybe weeks, in his home, with his daughter, while he had no idea. He should have felt relief that Kyle hadn't hurt her. But instead he felt shame. He should have been the one here, not someone from a photo buried in a drawer. That evening, David found the drawer. It was in Rachel's old writing desk, now, dusty with time. He opened it slowly and found the picture, a group shot from what looked like a college camping trip. There was Rachel, younger and smiling, and beside her, Kyle, arm around her shoulders, too close to be just a casual friend. David stared at the photo, heart racing. Why had she kept this all these years? And why had she never told him? Just then, Emily's voice broke the silence from the hallway. Mom said he was the one who helped her after Grandpa died. He used to come over a lot. She said he was always there when things were hard. David turned around. Did she ever say why they stopped talking? Emily shrugged. She just said, some things are better left in the past. Those words settled heavy in the room. Maybe Rachel had reasons for keeping Kyle away. But now, he'd returned. And somehow, he'd found his way back into their lives through Emily. Later that night, David found something else. Emails. Dozens of them. From Kyle. Hidden in a folder in Rachel's old laptop. Some dated months before she passed away. Some more recent. Some unread. Others opened and starred. Most were simple check-ins, asking how she was, offering help. A few were more personal. I still think about you. If you ever need anything. Nothing crossed the line, at least not clearly, but they hinted at something deeper, a connection that never fully died. David sat back, hands in his lap, trying to make sense of it. Had Rachel kept this man at arm's length, or had she leaned on him more than she admitted? Was Kyle here now because he cared, or because he saw a chance to fill a space he believed he still had a claim to? And underneath it all, the one question David couldn't stop asking himself. Was Kyle helping Emily out of kindness, or was he waiting for something? Let me know if you'd like to continue this with a plot twist segment or focus on Kyle's backstory. The next few days passed like a slow burn. David moved through the house like a man haunted, listening for sounds, rechecking. The locks at night, staying within arm's reach of Emily whenever he could. She noticed, of course. Kids always do. She didn't say anything, but he could feel it in the way she kept looking at him, like she was waiting for something. An answer, maybe, or for everything to go back to normal. But David didn't even know what normal was anymore. Kyle had vanished. No texts, no calls, Not a single sign he'd ever been there. David checked with neighbors. No one had seen him leave that night. No one had even seen him arrive. It was like he had slipped in and out of their lives without leaving a trace, except for the lingering questions he'd planted like seeds in David's mind. David couldn't stop wondering what else Kyle knew, why he had said Emily knew more than you think, and why Rachel had kept his emails hidden. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about now, about what Kyle wanted. And then, out of nowhere, a letter arrived. No return address. Just his name, printed neatly on the envelope. Inside, the handwriting was careful, familiar. David knew it instantly. It was Rachel's. His chest tightened as he unfolded the letter. The date in the corner was nearly a year old, 2 months before. She died. David, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wanted to tell you this face to face, but I never found the courage. There's something I've been holding on to, and I'm not proud of it. Kyle and we were close. Before you. Before everything. We lost touch, but after my diagnosis, I reached out. Not because I wanted to reopen the past, but because I didn't know who else to call. I was scared. I didn't want to burden you. You already had so much on your shoulders. He offered to help, and I let him. He's not perfect, but he was there for Emily when I couldn't be. If anything ever happens, and you're not home, and he shows up, please don't shut the door on him too quickly. Love, Rachel. David read the letter 3 times, every word tightening the knot in his chest. She had known. She had made choices without telling him. But she had also trusted Kyle, enough to leave him as a quiet backup, a contingency plan in case everything fell apart. David hated how that made him feel. Grateful, angry, betrayed, all at once. That evening, he sat outside on the porch while Emily colored in her notebook beside him. The air was heavy. Clouds hung low over the neighborhood. A storm was coming again. The wind had that sharp edge, like something was about to shift. "Dad?" Emily said softly. "Do you think he's coming back?" David didn't answer right away. "I don't know." She looked up. "Would it be okay if he did?" David looked at her closely. Her face was calm, but her eyes were searching his. "Why do you ask?" "I just think maybe he didn't mean to scare you. He was kind to me." David nodded slowly. "I know. I'm just trying to figure out what he really wants." Emily hesitated. "I think he wants to be forgiven." David's heart beat a little faster. "Did he tell you that?" She shook her head. "No, but I could tell." He looked sorry. David didn't respond. He didn't know how. Because the more he thought about it, the more he realized that maybe Kyle had stepped in because he needed something too. Maybe it wasn't just about Rachel or Emily. Maybe it was about making peace with something unfinished in his own life. But then, just as the sky cracked with the first roll of thunder, a knock came at the door. David stood up fast, too fast. Emily stayed on the porch, wide-eyed, watching. David opened the door slowly, and there he was. Kyle, soaking wet, no umbrella, hands in his pockets. His eyes met David's, calm but tired. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Kyle said before David could say a word. "But I need to talk to you, alone." David stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The rain had just started, drops, falling cold and sharp on his shoulders. "You've got 5 minutes," David said quietly. Kyle nodded. "I got a letter too, from Rachel, a different one. She told me she trusted you, but she also said if things ever went wrong, I should be ready to step in. For Emily." David tensed. "Step in how?" Kyle looked him square in the eye. "She wanted me to make sure Emily wasn't alone, if the system failed, if people forgot to check in. I didn't plan any of this. But when I came by and found her here, cold and scared. I knew I had to stay. David didn't move. "There's more," Kyle said. "Rachel had a second will, not official, just something handwritten. I wasn't supposed to act on it unless things got bad, but they did." David stood frozen in the rain, the paper still clenched between their hands, his grip tightening around the edges. Kyle's eyes didn't shift, didn't flinch, just quietly held their ground as thunder rumbled in the distance. David, finally, yanked the paper away and stepped back. He wanted to read it right there on the porch, but something inside him told him this wasn't the kind of thing to take in half-focused. So instead, he nodded once, sharp and cautious. "I'll read it," he said, voice low. "But you wait here?" Kyle didn't argue. He just leaned against the railing, dripping with rain. Inside, David walked straight past Emily, who stared at him with worry all over her face. He gave her a small nod, part reassurance, part warning not to ask yet, and disappeared into the den, shutting the door behind him. He opened the folded paper with hands that were no longer steady. The note was short, barely 5 lines, but every word hit like a punch. "If anything happens to me and David can't be there, don't let her end up with my parents. You know why? You were there. You saw what they did. Promise me you'll protect her if I can't." "Rachel?" David stared at the paper, reading the words again and again, his stomach twisting tighter each time. Her parents. Rachel had always kept some distance from them, but she never said why. Not really. There'd been vague hints over the years, conversations that changed direction, sudden silence when they called. But never this. Never a warning. And Kyle? Kyle had been there? What did that mean? David stormed back outside, the rain now pouring, harder, streaking down his face and soaking through his shirt. Kyle straightened when he saw him. "What did she mean?" David demanded. "What did you see?" Kyle hesitated. "You're not going to like it." "Try me." Kyle glanced back toward the house, then lowered his voice. "Back in college, Rachel got sick. Not just physically, mentally too. It was bad. She told her parents, and instead of helping her, they blamed her. Said she was weak. Threatened to put her in some place if she didn't pull herself together. She called me the night they locked her in her old room and took her phone. I had to go get her out." David's chest tightened. "Why didn't she ever tell me this?" "Because she didn't want pity," Kyle said. "She fought to build something better. She didn't want her past to be what defined her." David looked away, the rain masking the heat creeping up his neck. All this time he'd been angry at Kyle, for being close to Rachel, for helping when David couldn't. But now, the guilt was starting to creep in. Kyle had seen a side of Rachel he never did, one she never let David close enough to know. Still, that didn't answer everything. "And now?" David asked. "Why now? Why come back?" Kyle exhaled. "Because I got a call. Last week. From Rachel's mother." David's blood ran cold. "She found my number somehow," Kyle said. "Said she was going to challenge for custody. Said David was never around. Said you were unstable. That Emily deserved a more stable family." David felt like the ground beneath him had tilted. "She can't do that. I'm her father. There's no way she can take her." "You'd be surprised," Kyle said grimly. "I've seen cases where grandparents win, especially when the father's active duty. They'll say you left her with a sitter, that she was alone, that the house wasn't safe." David turned toward the house, heart pounding. Every moment suddenly felt heavier. That night, Emily was found on the floor. It wasn't just a tragedy. It was a weapon. A detail that could be twisted in court. And if Rachel's parents were determined, they could use every single misstep against him. Kyle stepped forward. "That's why I came back. Not to take your place, not to interfere, but to warn you." David looked at him, suspicion still burning under the surface. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" "Because I didn't know if you'd listen," Kyle said. "I figured you'd throw me out before I could explain." David didn't answer. He just stood there, staring past Kyle, thoughts racing. If this was true, if Rachel's parents were planning something, he needed to act fast. He needed to protect Emily. But there was something else, something that still didn't sit right. "What do they really want?" David asked. "They barely visited when Rachel was alive. Why now?" Kyle hesitated. Then he said quietly, "Money. Rachel had a life insurance policy, a large one. I don't know all the details, but she once told me her parents would do anything to get control of it." David felt a chill crawl down his spine. Suddenly, this wasn't just about custody. It was about control, about power, about people who had once locked their daughter in a room now trying to take her child for their own gain. Inside, the porch light flickered again. Then, from inside the house, Emily's scream. Both men bolted to the door at the same time, David throwing it open. So fast it nearly snapped off its hinges. They ran to the living room, where Emily stood frozen by the front window, pointing outside. "Someone's watching," she whispered. David's heart pounded as he rushed to the window. Across the street, under the cover of a tree, a figure moved. Then vanished. The house filled with silence, but the tension didn't ease. Whoever it was, they weren't just watching, they were waiting. Let me know if you'd like to continue into the climactic confrontation or unravel the hidden family secrets. David stood protectively in front of Emily, his eyes locked on the dark patch across the street where the shadow had vanished. His mind was racing. Every part of his training screamed that this wasn't just a coincidence. Someone had been watching, waiting, and now they knew. They had to act. Kyle pulled the curtains shut and turned to David. "We need to call someone." David shook his head. "Not yet. I want to know who it is first." Emily was clinging to his leg now, scared but silent. David scooped her up, held her close, and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you." They stayed up that night, all three of them. Kyle sat on the couch, phone in hand, watching the security app from the cameras David had installed just a day earlier. David paced between the rooms every half hour, checking windows, checking doors. Emily eventually dozed off in her father's arms, exhaustion finally outweighing fear. It was just after 3 a.m. when the front camera blinked to life. A motion alert popped on Kyle's phone. He tapped it immediately, the screen filling with the grainy image of a figure walking across the lawn, slow, deliberate steps. Not sneaky, brazen, almost like they wanted to be seen. David rushed to the front, flipping the porch light on and throwing open the door. But by the time he got out there, the yard was empty. Only the faint imprint of shoes in the wet grass remained. Then, the mailbox creaked. David turned sharply. A small white envelope now sat in the open box, right at the edge. He walked over and picked it up. Inside was a court document. Rachel's parents had filed for emergency custody. The hearing was in 3 days. David's hands trembled, not from fear, but fury. They weren't wasting any time. They wanted Emily, and now they had the legal wheels in motion. Back inside, Kyle looked over the document. They must have hired someone to watch, to gather evidence. That's why they knew when you were deployed. Why they knew when Emily was left with that sitter. David's jaw tightened. They've been watching longer than we thought. The next 2 days were a whirlwind. David met with a lawyer, pulled every file, every bit of service documentation, every proof of stable guardianship. He even tracked down the old sitter and got a statement proving Emily had never been left alone intentionally. Still, none of it felt like enough. Because he knew what people in courtrooms believed. They believed what looked right on paper. And Rachel's parents had money, influence, and a head start. On the morning of the hearing, Emily clutched her father's hand tighter than ever. She didn't understand all of it, but she knew it was serious. That much was clear in the way she leaned her head against his arm as they sat outside the courtroom. Inside, the proceedings started quickly. Rachel's parents sat stiff and confident, their attorney speaking in calm, calculated words. They painted a picture of concern, a child left in poor conditions, an absent father, an unstable living situation. David sat through it, biting his tongue, his hands tight in his lap. When it was finally his turn, he stood up and spoke from the heart. He talked about love, about Rachel, about the nights he read Emily bedtime stories over video calls from halfway across the world, about how Rachel had trusted him, and about how they had built a life of resilience, even in hard times. Then he handed over Rachel's handwritten note. The judge read it carefully, quietly, but it was when Kyle stood to speak that everything shifted. Kyle was calm, composed. He explained his history with Rachel, not as a romantic partner, but as someone who had once been there for her when her parents hadn't. He told the court about the night he helped her escape, about the way her parents isolated her, and then he produced the handwritten will. The court fell silent as the judge read it. After a long pause, the judge looked toward Rachel's parents. "You withheld this information from the court?" he asked. Their lawyer looked flustered. "Your Honor, there was no legal obligation to—" But the judge raised his hand. "Enough. I've seen more than enough to question your intentions." When the final ruling came down, it was clear. Full guardianship remained with David. The challenge was denied. Emily ran to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist. As the tension finally broke, Kyle stood to the side, silent but smiling. Outside the courthouse, as David strapped Emily into the car seat, he turned to Kyle. "I don't know what to say." Kyle shrugged. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep..." David didn't move for a few seconds after reading the message. He stood there by the car, phone in hand, wind brushing past like even the weather was holding its breath. His eyes locked with Kyle's, who had turned back slowly, sensing the tension rising again. The silence stretched thin between them. David held out the phone without a word. Kyle read the message, and his jaw tightened just enough to be noticed. "I didn't send that," he said firmly. "I didn't say you did," David replied, but his tone was edged, tired, and watchful. He had just been through one of the most stressful weeks of his life, fighting for his daughter, trying to make sense of the lies, and holding himself together while ghosts from Rachel's past kept crawling out from the shadows. This message was just another stone added to the pile. Later that evening, after they'd made it home, after Emily was tucked safely in bed, David sat at the kitchen table staring at that message again. It didn't have a number, just unknown. Whoever sent it knew about the letter. And Rachel hadn't shared that with many people, not even David until recently. He thought about everything. The way Rachel had distanced herself from her parents, the emotional scars she'd buried. The fact that she trusted Kyle enough to protect their daughter if she couldn't. And then it clicked. The message wasn't a threat. It was fear. Fear. From someone who knew the truth was out now, and that their hold on the situation had slipped. David blocked the number, saved a copy of the message for the lawyer, and finally turned off his phone. He knew this part wasn't over, not entirely, but the most important part, protecting Emily, was finally secure. And for now, that was enough. The next morning brought a strange calm. The air felt different, lighter. Emily woke up in her own bed, safe, smiling, asking for pancakes like the nightmare of the last week had never touched her. David made them just the way she liked. Slightly burnt edges, lots of syrup, a little smiley face and blueberries on top. She giggled and said it looked silly but happy, which David thought summed things up better than any adult could. Kyle stayed a few more days, helping patch things up around the house and running small errands so David could get time with Emily. It wasn't awkward between them anymore. They still had their differences, but something had shifted. Kyle wasn't a rival. He wasn't even just Rachel's old friend. He was someone who had seen the storm coming and ran toward it anyway. One evening, the two of them sat out back, watching Emily play with chalk on the pavement. "I keep thinking," David said quietly, "if I had come home just one day later, I might have found her gone." Kyle didn't look away from Emily. "But you didn't. You came back in time." David nodded. "Yeah, I guess I did." Then he added, "You sticking around long term?" Kyle shrugged. "If you're okay with it. This place, it's quieter than I'm used to, but maybe that's not such a bad thing." David thought about it for a second, then said, "She could use more good people in her life. So could I." Kyle smiled at that. It wasn't dramatic, just real. Two people, once on opposite sides of a line they didn't draw, now quietly rebuilding something out of the wreckage. As the weeks passed, David finally started to feel like he could breathe again. He resumed light duties at the base, gradually rebuilding his routine. Emily went back to school and started smiling more often, laughing louder. The nightmares faded. She asked about her mom sometimes, and David always answered honestly, gently. He never made Rachel into a perfect figure, just a woman who loved deeply, tried hard, and had scars she hid too well. One day, while cleaning out the last of Rachel's old boxes, David found another envelope. This one was taped to the bottom of a photo album. It was addressed to him, written in her neat handwriting. He opened it, heart thudding. Inside was a short letter. "David, if you're reading this, I guess I didn't get the chance to say everything I should have. Thank you for loving me, for giving Emily a life full of stories, music, and bedtime hugs. If the time ever comes that you feel lost or alone, just remember, you were always her safe place. You still are. Don't let fear make you forget that. I might. Proud of you. Always. Love. Rachel." David folded the letter and held it against his chest for a long moment. Then he placed it gently in a box marked, "Keep Forever." That night, when he tucked Emily in, she asked if he could stay a little longer beside her bed. He smiled, slid under the covers, and wrapped his arms around her. Her little hand found his, warm and soft. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Yeah, baby. Mommy would be proud of us, right?" He smiled, eyes stinging a little. "She already is." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The house was quiet. The storm had passed. And in its place, something steady, something real, was finally growing. A family, not perfect, not whole in the old way, but whole in a new one. One built on truth, on love, and on never giving up. Let me know if you'd like a short recap version, F, or a story trailer script, F, based on this.